happy Friday, and thanks for tuning into radiofreerhinecliff.org. In this show in particular, correct me if I'm Norm, I'm your host, Norm, and I'm thrilled to be here tonight with Dr. Karen Sullivan. Karen, thanks for coming in.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, well, the pleasure's been all mine all day, sort of like looking into who you are and what you're interested in. And holy crap, you're interested in like everything.
Not everything, but a lot of things.
Yeah, well, you're the Irma Brandeis, did I pronounce that right?
Brandeis, yeah.
Brandeis Professor of Romance, Literature, and Culture at Bard College. But you're also interested in French studies, Irish and Celtic studies, Italian studies, literature, medieval studies, Middle Eastern studies, theology, and a whole bunch of other stuff, including evidently cello.
Yes. Though I have to say, I'm a total amateur with the cello. I'm starting out.
And you came here from your cello
studies. Yes.
And where do they happen?
I have a teacher down in Salt Point who's very wonderful, but I just really enjoy it, you know. And I think I'm at the age where I'm just can do whatever the hell I want. I think I can say the hell, but and I just have always loved the cello. I was just at a concert this weekend, and I was like, God, the cello is like the best instrument, so I want to play it.
And how long have you been studying the cello?
About a year and a half at this point. It's
and,
not very long.
And what age does it begin, the age of, I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want?
Well, in retrospect, I think, your entire life you should basically do that. And actually, in kind of retrospect, I think I pretty much have done whatever I wanted my entire life. But I think I do it a bit more brazenly, nowadays.
Brazenly?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Well, I think a lot of it is that, most things that I do, I have like expertise in, and you're kind of ashamed not to do something that you're not very good at.
Right.
And so at this point in my life, I'm just thinking, no, I'm not going to be held back by that either.
By that ashamedness. And so is it safe to guess maybe you get a little bit of pleasure out of being a beginner at something and not having that expertise?
No, I'd like to be really good. But I'm not, So, but I also think, I remember actually the president of my college saying this once, that one of the many reasons why professors should always continue to publish is that you need to kind of, put yourself out there and expose yourself, to criticism and allow people to read your work and maybe say, well, I have an issue with this, So if you're a professor, you're always kind of reading other people's, you're reading your students' work, you're giving them feedback, and it's a difficult process. So I actually think it's very good, for someone, at whatever age, to be kind of putting themselves out there and to be bad at something and to respond well to criticism, which is very, very difficult. So I'm struggling with that. But
well, that's interesting here. I mean, my idea of academia is that people are always taking swipes at other professors.
They are, but the thing is, yes, and if you're not willing to people take swipes at you, you shouldn't be in academia. But the thing is with that, like when that's happening, you can stand by your guns. You say, no, this is my argument. This is how I read this text. Like, no, you need to take into consideration this. You can defend yourself as a professional, as an expert. Whereas if someone corrects me for having the wrong note of playing the cello, I just got the wrong note.
Right.
So it's almost an exercise in humility,
Yeah.
And humility is a medieval virtue. I wanted to write a book, kind of called like Forgotten, Virtues, and humility really is one.
Right.
The ability to kind of admit you were wrong, the ability to be wrong and not be devastated and ashamed of that.
Right. But also not be able to sort of argue the point.
Yeah.
So you said you've been an expert for much of your life.
Well,
where did you begin your life?
Well, I was actually born in Germany, oddly enough, but I grew up in the North Shore of Boston, and then I went to Bryn Mawr College as an undergraduate and to Berkeley for my PhD in comparative literature. I studied in Paris as well. So, I studied comparative literature basically,
right,
all the way through.
And where did you go to high school in Boston?
I went to a boarding school, a New England boarding school called Brook School. And then I was actually spent a year when I was 16, 17. What would have been my last year in high school, I spent it living in Brittany and France and learning French with a kind of program run by Andover, Exeter, and St. Paul's.
Oh, wow. Learning French and French history. And
Yeah. No, it was it was one of the best experiences of my life, I have to say. Just total immersion. And especially back, at that moment, you were completely out of touch with your family. I mean, you were really immersed.
Right.
And, I learned, art history. I learned history. I learned the French language. I mean, that was really the underpinning for my whole education in many ways.
Wow, for the education to follow.
Yeah.
Which was a lot. Undergraduate, I'm guessing you got a master's somewhere, and then a PhD.
Yeah, all at Berkeley. Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. And were your parents academics as well?
No, actually, I come from a family of lawyers. My great aunt Miriam, was a lawyer at a time when there weren't a whole lot of women lawyers, and she started up her own firm. And then my father, became a partner in that firm.
Nice.
And my other aunt, great aunt, kind of worked for it, and so I kind of worked for them, kind of growing up. And so, I mean, if there was any expectation, it was that, you become a lawyer, which is a good training. I mean, I actually kind of have worked a fair amount in law and medieval law. People sometimes say I kind of write like a lawyer, which I take as a compliment. Because
which part of that you take as a compliment?
Well, I do. I think I have a very clear sense of kind of what evidence is and what kind of stands as evidence and how to kind of make a case in a methodical way.
Right.
So I think that's really good training, to have.
Very, very, very interesting. Because, I didn't have a chance to read any of your stuff. I don't read academic stuff anyway because I spend way too much time going to the dictionary. But from the criticism and the sort of the synopses I've read about your stuff, a lot of it has to do with how we know what we know is fact or not throughout the ages.
No, you hit it. You got it exactly right. Because all of my work basically has been about what we can call epistemological issues.
Right.
How you gain access to the truth and ways in which people conceive of how you gain access to truth. So that is I've written different topics on very different things, but that has been the number one constant. You know what you're talking about.
And did that maybe start when you were working with lawyers as a young...
No, I mean, it's hard to say. I kind of have a theory that everyone has something that they don't understand in life.
Right.
And, there's kind of this empty center, like, this kind of question that they can't answer, and they could just go around and around it. And I think that's kind of what it is for me. I mean, if I were actually able to answer that question, I probably wouldn't have to write books. But I'm always just trying to work around that about how to kind of determine the truth. I think another thing too is that I'm a medievalist now, but I actually started out as a Renaissance scholar for my undergraduate and up to my master's degree, and one of the things that Renaissance humanists believed is that. There's a phrase in Latin, in utrumque partem, where they talk about on the one hand and the other hand. And that's kind of always the way they think. They always kind of want to look at things from multiple perspectives. That's why in some ways there's not even really Renaissance philosophy, because they were kind of anti-doctrinal. They were so much interested in the multiplicity of perspectives. And I think that's something that I remain really interested in. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I think it's upsetting to people I know. I always want to understand, well, where is the other person coming from and why? Mm-hmm.
And how does that play in the halls of academia? It's both this and that, sort of holding the tension of opposites in your work.
I think it's good as a teacher, as a professor, because it does mean, like you have a student who's coming to you and you always have to take what he or she is taking seriously. Like, why are you coming to that? What's your evidence? What's your perspective? And let me take that seriously. The wonderful philosopher Blaise Pascal from the 17th century, he argues that we don't actually disagree about anything. We just approach the problem from different angles. If you think of something like, the wise man and the elephant. And I kind of believe that,
What is the wise man and the elephant?
Oh, it's a story. We're not even sure of the origin of it. But I'm sorry, it's not the wise man, it's the blind man and the elephant. The blind men are like touching the elephant, and one person one says it's really long and tubular, and the other one says, no, it's big and floppy, and they're all kind of seeing, the elephant from different angles. It's funny, my Freudian slip, because I actually do think they're wise.
Right. That's funny. I'm trying to remember in some short story by J.D. Salinger, he talks about teaching kids. He would never tell them names for things. He would take them to an elephant.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't tell them it's big or it's gray or anything. Just here's an elephant. Experience
that's
it.
a wonderful idea. So they wouldn't have prejudices coming into whatever he's talking about.
Pretty sure he was quoting some Buddhist concept.
Okay. Yeah, that would
as
make
he liked
sense.
to do.
Yeah.
But it was just one of those things
love
that
that.
stuck with me, and not a lot of stuff sticks with me.
Yeah. I'm gonna take advantage of that.
Yeah, well, if I track down the story, I'll send it to you. Now, you talked about being a professor, and one of the things you like to do. Do you enjoy being? I mean, I know a lot of academics who are like, "Oh, it'd be the best job ever if I didn't have to teach."
No, I think it's just the opposite. There's a wonderful kind of description in, Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. He gives a series of portraits of the pilgrims going to Canterbury, and one of them is the Clerk of Oxford, the Clerk of Oxford. And the last line of that little description of this idealized, kind of scholar is that, and gladly would he learn and gladly teach. And what's Chaucer's point there is that the two are connected. If you want to teach, if you want to learn, if you want to write, everything kind of goes together.
Right.
I've learned so much. I was just giving a talk about, a kind of current book of mine recently to some students at Bard, and I got so much out of their comments and their questions. It really helped me kind of figure out, my argument, there. And it was thrilling to me to be able to speak with them and to share what I was coming up with them. To just, be in my room and writing for myself, I would find that literally maddening. It would drive me crazy.
But at some point, I'm guessing that you're out of the room learning for yourself.
Yes.
For the things you're going to put
absolutely.
into that book.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's an incredible delight, is to do that as well. Being a professor or a scholar, it's both very solitary and very social. And you have to be comfortable kind of doing both things. You have to be off by yourself, just reading and getting excited and, going to archives. But then you have to be engaging with people, as well. Whether you're students or whether they're people that you're writing for or your audience or reviewers or, in a podcast.
Right. And what are you reading and learning about right now?
Oh, well, I'm finishing up, this is kind of ridiculous, but I'm finishing up 2 short books right now.
Short books. How long is a short book for you?
Well, one is really short. One is 40,000 words, which is about, less than half of kind of what a normal book would be like 110,000 words. So 40,000 is less than half than that. And this is kind of I feel kind of a little ashamed of this. But,
good.
There's a series at the University of Wales Press, does about medieval animals. And they came up with a book about, medieval swans. And I like swans, and I got the book, and I thought, well, this is a perfectly good book. But, someone should just really write a book about bears, because bears are like the best. And then I thought, I want to write that book. And so I kind of, would you be interested in a book about medieval bears? And so that's the kind of a short book that I've just finished up, one of them.
So is it like literally the process? You like swans are okay, but bears are the best.
That's exactly what I was thinking. And that's actually pretty much what I wrote to them.
Where does that come from, where that bears are the best?
I don't know. It's one of these things where, at a certain point you start writing this book and think, when did I get obsessed with bears? Has it been my entire life?
Yeah.
I have a neighbor who's obsessed with bears as well, so, but then the more you think about it, if you go out in the world and you will notice bears are everywhere. Here's a little shop, look at the packaging, Polar Springs, just everywhere there are actually bears as kind of marketing. If you think of like political causes, Smokey the Bear, global warming, what do you think about? You think about a bear, Al Gore and the bear, the World Wildlife Fund, what do they have as their symbol? A bear. So I think I'm not alone in being obsessed with bears.
You don't think it's just what they call the uniqueness factor? When you start to think about something, you see it everywhere.
Totally.
I see.
And
bears
that's completely
is the thing.
what but it also was true, right?
You're also standing up that they are actually.
There's this thing that, so why did the polar bear in particular become the symbol of global warming? And because there are always other animals you can use. And actually, the secret that no one wants to kind of disclose is actually polar bears have been doing pretty well. I was recently up in the Arctic Circle. The numbers of polar bears has kind of increased significantly in kind of recent years. No one can understand why. So, but I think, the polar bear, just pulls on our heartstrings because as medieval people would say, bears are us. Bears stand up, they sit down, their eyes are kind of shaped like ours. As people notice in the Middle Ages, if a bear skin looks like a human being.
Right.
We're very similar, even physiologically. There was a wonderful story, a strange story about a zoo in China. And there was a bear there, and it was like standing around and it was waving at people, and it was like, and everyone said, it went viral, and everyone on the internet said, that's not a bear, that's a man or a woman in a bear suit. Because it was completely unbelievable that it was a bear, but it actually was a bear.
Right.
And so, and there aren't many animals where that can happen, where you can really get confused about kind of what species you're dealing with.
Right. Here, have you been to Sinterklaas here in Rhinebeck?
No, I'm aware of it every year, but I never deal with the parking situations.
What?
But I know it's there, and I know it's wonderful. I've heard wonderful things about it.
One of the stars is the polar bear.
Oh, well, I clearly have to go. I guess they are bringing it back, right?
Yeah, supposedly. I haven't heard anything.
Okay, I promise. If you tell me there's a bit, last year they had ants. I'm sorry, ants. But if you say there's a polar bear, I'm there.
All right, good.
I'll find parking.
Yeah, I'm sure if they do it, the polar bear will be back.
Okay.
So what the hell were you doing in the Arctic Circle?
Oh, this is a very sad story.
Oh, no.
I spent 2 weeks on a 1940s fishing vessel, going up and down the coast, of this Svalbard archipelago, looking for polar bears. And you know how many polar bears I saw?
0.
It's very sad.
Egads.
Yeah. But anyway, I had a wonderful time. I saw Arctic foxes. I saw whales. I ate a whale, which I didn't expect to do. At lots of,
What kind of whale did you eat?
A minke whale. It's actually really good.
Uh-huh.
You think, of course it's meat, but I ate it on the boat. It was quite delicious. I recommend it.
Was it cooked or sort of?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, it wasn't like sushi. It was like, it was delicious.
Uh-huh.
So I recommend, going to Svalbard and eating minke whale. I mean, they have enough whales they can harvest them, so you can, but it's very tasty, minke whale.
And so you went there looking for a polar bear. Was this part of your research on the book about bears?
Yes, it was part of my research because I just thought, I wasn't writing a book about unicorns or phoenixes. I mean, these are things that actually exist. So I wanted to just have a feeling for it. And I've always done this with my books. I've always kind of wanted to go and do some type of pilgrimage of I wrote a book about Joan of Arc. I went to kind of see, kind of where she was from. I went to every place that, Dracula supposedly lived. I mean, things like that. So I wanted to go see, and there, in the Middle Ages, there were 8 species of bears today. And the medieval bears, there are only kind of 2 that you have in Europe in the Middle Ages and 2 that you have in Europe nowadays. The brown bear and the polar bear. And so I wanted to go see the polar bear. And it's just, it's just incredibly thrilling, So I had no success, saying the polar bear, but I talked to a lot of people about bears. I learned a huge amount. I mean, just talking with people who actually are dealing with polar bears on a day-to-day level is fascinating. You're not allowed, this is the northernmost town in the world. You're not allowed outside the perimeter of the town without a rifle. Because of the polar bears.
Right. Yeah, I read that in a book.
Yeah. Oh, it's incredibly cool.
Huh.
And then I went to these Russian colonies as well. And in the Russian colony, you're not allowed outside the building without a rifle.
Right. Because of the polar bears.
Yeah.
And how mean they are.
Yeah. And polar bears, you just don't mess with them.
No.
There's nothing, And even if you have a rifle, it's really dangerous anyway.
And so you're in the Arctic Circle, you're conducting interviews with people who deal with polar bears every day.
Yeah.
And who did you find, and what were the most interesting stories you got?
Well, the thing that I found really interesting is what is sometimes called a nuisance bear, or the concept of a nuisance bear, or the concept of a problem bear. It's not unique to polar bears, but it's certainly common among.
Well, they have them here. The nuisance bears are the ones who get into shit over and over.
But it's kind of fascinating to me. One of the things that I kind of, when I was working out, what's my argument about this book? I'm looking at a lot of medieval texts and what they're saying about bears, and what's the difference between the way they see bears and the way that we see bears. And what struck me is that we tend to think of bears have no agency. that kind of human beings are the ones with agency and therefore responsibility. And bears, along with every other, kind of non-human kind of life form, is just a passive victim of humans' violence. And
Right.
you can see the argument for this. Listen, global warming is real. I'm not knocking this.
Right.
But there's a way in which the idea of that bears have no agency, bears have no individuality, and it's just not the case. Bears are incredibly individual, and there are nice bears, and then there are bad bears, or bears that are bad from our perspective, and nuisance bears. And of course, so then we say, well, the nuisance bears have no nuisance bear because we've somehow made it bad. But it's just very curious to me. This stripping of all. It kind of makes the bears less than us by saying that they're just pure passive victims, and anything bad they do, it's because of bad things that we do.
Right. You're not on Facebook, are you?
Oh,
Are you?
Yeah.
Because every time there's a bear thing,
Yes.
like just every other comment or more, it's like, it's their place, we're encroaching.
Exactly.
So, at least in Facebook, they get a lot of agency.
I know, but don't you think that's kind of strange? Listen, it's one of the, for my money, it's one of the great things about the internet is the number of bear videos you can kind of come across nowadays, which are often fabulous because you can set up some cam in the woods and we learn so much about them. But it just seems very strange. I was like driving down River Road long ago, and then you see a bear. It's like, okay, my God, we shouldn't be living in Rhinebeck. We need to get. I think it's one of the great things about our time is actually wildlife has often done very well in me. Look at the deer and how many more deer there are than there used to be. This is true. I was giving a talk at Harvard University a couple of months ago, and I was walking around Harvard Square, and I ran across a whole flock of wild turkeys, and they're like, oh yeah, those are the wild turkeys that live in Harvard Square. It's like, so I just don't buy this. Why do we want to say, okay, we shouldn't be anywhere because actually the animals are doing quite well, coming into Harvard Square.
Right. I'm just thinking about the bears and not having agency, and the bears more easily personified than lots of other animals.
Absolutely, because they have such personality.
Well, and also they're our size.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And also
a man fills a bear costume
and the
pretty
mother
well.
bear and the cubs. Bears are very solitary creatures, but the mother bears and their cubs is this fantastical bond. But I hope you've gone on to just YouTube and watch videos about people, bears, going into swimming pools with their cubs. They're bears in hammocks. There's a whole genre of videos of bears on hammocks.
Yeah.
Bears love hammocks.
Right.
And it's like, I think that's kind of a lovely thing. I don't think, because there's also this notion that we don't want any, contact with bears, because any contact between human and bears, and you can see the logic to this. That line, a fed bear is a dead bear.
Yeah.
If you feed a bear, the bear is going to be like, oh, human beings, food. And then, then bad things will happen and that bear will end up shot, So I understand the whole logic to this.
Right.
But they're coming to our houses. They're swimming on our pools. They're swinging on our hammocks. They're breaking into our houses, opening the window and the door, climbing in, opening the refrigerator, stealing hams. There's also a whole thing about bears and donuts. They really are obsessed with honey, especially Krispy Kreme donuts is their favorite thing in the world.
No.
But it's true. Look, I swear, I can go to YouTube and Google, kind of bears and Krispy Kreme donuts.
Right.
It's always been true. Winnie the Pooh, they love honey. They love sweet things, like I do, too. So.
Love that. So have you had encounters with bears in the wild?
Well, the good thing. So the sad story is my attempt to find polar bears. But the happy story is that I went to British Columbia. And it was a little difficult. I had to fly to Vancouver. Then I had to take a little tiny plane, to this one town. I was practically the only woman on this plane because everyone else was a man going fishing. And then I arrived at this little town, and then you take one of those planes that kind of just land on the water, and I kind of flew to some place that was completely off the grid. It was in a First Nations, it was owned by First Nations people.
Right.
It was really nice. It was very, very expensive, I have to say. But the good thing is that they took me out on we went on a boat and we went to a little island and there were these stands that are over a creek, and you go into the stand and you actually don't even have to stay there very long, and then you see the grizzlies arriving to have the salmon. And that was one of the great thrills of my life, I have to say.
You have a shit ton more adventure than I mostly think of academics having. And a lot of it just with this bear book. Lord only knows how much adventure you've had before this.
It's a pretty good job being a professor.
So you saw the grizzlies coming in. Coming in from where to where?
Well, this is the time at the end of the summer, and then it would continue on into the fall. But I had to be back teaching. This is when they're eating the salmon, they're getting fattened up, for the winter.
Right.
And so, but it was it was just so fascinating to see them, and to be that close to them. I mean, it really is, to use a completely non-medieval word, it was sublime. I mean, to feel that sense of the power and the force, the potential danger, to be that close to it, it was a great thrill.
And do they have other bears? Do they have like brown bears or Kodiak bears?
Yeah, no, they do. Black. But if a grizzly bear is in town, all the other bears move out. You don't want to mess. They don't want to mess with a grizzly bear.
Right. Because they have a reputation for being very mean and
they're
very hungry.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But if you do have some encounters with grizzly bears and polar bears, but then the polar bear is like the most fearsome of all bears. So Kodiak bears are really cool as well.
So if there's a fight, polar bear wins.
Yeah, I don't know if there would be a fight, but they do, and they've even kind of mated. I mean, you have combinations of kind of grizzly and polar bears, which sounds very strange. They usually live in different areas. I mean, the polar bears obviously live so far north, and the grizzly bears, aren't quite that far.
Right. So when you're watching, where are you watching from? Like a bear-proof shelter?
No, it's a stand. They make these kind of stands, and you have to be really, really quiet. And you can't bring anything. This is really cool. You can't bring anything that smells at all.
Right.
Even like the one Tic Tac a bear could smell. They may have the best sense of smell of any animal in the world.
Right.
Which is one of the many things that are kind of cool about that. But so you want to be really, really quiet. You don't want to make noise. You can't shout. You can't point because they will understandably think that's a threat.
You can't point?
No, because people actually, it is an aggressive gesture. Even we know that pointing is kind of aggressive. And bears think, because bears are like us, they realize it's aggressive as well. And also when you point things, it often doesn't end up well. There are other things you point can end up badly.
Great. So you're there. You saw the bears. Did you ever see? Are there polar bears in captivity that you could have seen?
There are. I didn't really want to see them. I did, however, go down. There were some new residents in Washington, D.C. I hope you kind of followed them. I did kind of recently go down and meet those new nice residents, in Washington, D.C. The two panda bears. Who are, of course, an utter delight, to see. So those, you're never going to see a panda bear in the wild, Right. I went to China, but I'm sorry, even the Chinese never saw them,
Right.
So it's a great thrill to kind of just, and they seem relatively happy in captivity.
Okay, so you said there are 8 kinds of bears. Is that what you said?
Oh my God,
so
now you're going to quiz me. Yes.
Polar, panda, black, brown, Kodiak.
There are 2 types. There are 2. There are North American black bears, and then there are Asian black bears, polar bears, panda bears, sun bears. God, and they're the one. Brown bears. The brown bears are very. Brown bears are the tricky one. I warn you. Because the question is the subspecies, and they can be so kind of varied in size. But there are bears on every continent aside from Antarctica, and in Africa there used to be an Atlas bear, but they're in Asia, they're in Latin America, they're obviously in North America, right. They're in Europe, and not in Australia either. A koala bear is not a bear.
And your book is going to be about bears in history or literature?
Yeah, it's just about medieval bears. So the book will be called, as part of this series, as Introducing the Medieval Bear. So what I do, I'm not a scientist. I'm a medieval literature person. And so what I'm doing is I'm looking at how medieval people saw bears. And it's really, really fascinating. And so I have so many kind of wonderful, accounts that medieval people had of their encounters, with bears. And so it's very comprehensive. I think I'm addressing like all interesting accounts of bears whatsoever, but I focus upon the most interesting ones and so upon certain ways. And basically the chapters are going to be, there's one about kind of bears as creatures of God. about kind of theological perceptions of bears. Oftentimes hermits, in the woods were friends with bears. That's a whole kind of chapter about that. There's one about people who become bears. And this is the Vikings, a berserker warrior, someone who goes berserk and becomes a berserker warrior. We get the term from that. Is someone, the word goes back to the word for bear. It means bear skin. So I have a kind of complicated argument about that, but there's a beautiful, beautiful text about, a battle going on between, this one king and, his sister, and then the most famous warrior of the king, isn't out there fighting, and his companion is like, where's my friend? Right? And he goes to the hall and he finds this guy just sitting there, and he says, you need to go out fighting, and he says, you shouldn't have interrupted me. Because he had been fighting in the form of a bear, and he had been he had been making sure that they kind of win the battle. So that is completely fascinating. But there's a whole if you're an Old Norse person and you will dream of animals. If you see a lion, is obviously going to be a king. If you see bears coming to you, it means there are noble warriors who are coming to you. And this is not an image. This is actually the spirit of those people. Being projected in the form of a bear. So it's kind of like in Philip Pullman or something. You have an animal counterpart of you.
Right.
And if you ever see that animal counterpart yourself, it means you're going to die very soon.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, no, so there's a fascinating whole thing.
You see it in the flesh, not in your dreams.
Yeah, exactly. Bears as lovers, bears who fell in love with women, who abducted them, had sex with them, had children with them. The dynasties of Denmark, Norway, and England are all descended from bears, apparently. There's one account of a woman falling in love with a man and abducting him. It's a very crazy story. And then the last chapter is on bears as bear baiting and bear dancing, which we don't really like anymore. But it's a much more complicated story than
we don't like anymore.
We don't like the idea of it's considered animal abuse. To sick dogs on bears.
Bear baiting.
Yeah, bear baiting.
Bear dancing.
Bear dancing is, it's also become illegal, in a lot of countries.
And what was that when people would dance with bears?
Well, it's particularly, I think we were supposed to call the Roma or the Shinti, but gypsies. They were organized by caste, and two of the the gypsy caste are what they do is they work with bears.
Okay.
And this has been the case in India, and it's also the case in Europe until quite recently. There's a preserve in Bulgaria where they tried to collect all the bears that were being used. But they lived with the bears. They were totally devoted to the bears. There's a wonderful book written about what happened to the bears that were taken away and put in that preserve. The bears are not happy.
Well, the bears are not happy.
Yeah.
And how is that? How are they showing their displeasure, their unhappiness?
This is what's really, it's really a haunting book, about the dancing bears of Bulgaria. So these bears, there are all of these, activist types who environmentalists who would go to these, these Roma Sinti Gypsy people and persuade them to give up their bears, and they would be very sad. They love their bears, and then they bring them there, and the bears have been there for years and years, and it's it's a nice environment. They should be happy, but the bears don't have anything to do. Of course, they can't hunt the way a bear would normally do.
Right.
They're just given food. They have to hide the food. They provide them with some stimulation. It's really boring.
Right.
But what is really most striking is that when human beings show up, a lot of the bears stand up on their hind legs and start dancing. They seem to want that again. But the book is actually the interest in that the person has in the bears is that it's actually a metaphor for people under communism. That if you've been brought up, trained, to be obeying orders, good news, we don't have communism, you're free. And that a lot of people, are not happy in that situation. And the bears aren't happy either.
Right.
So it's an interesting book.
Right. The first thing you were talking about bears in the wild.
Yeah.
And I thought of killer whales. There were all these attacks in the Mediterranean for a long time. Killer whales attacking boats. And it's wow, the animals are revolting. They're not happy with what we're doing to their planet. But that's not how you meant it.
No. The bears are not violent, and they wouldn't. They've never been violent. All their lives have been trained not to be violent. I mean, the thing that's really striking to me. I mean, what the line that always got stuck in my head is that in the 13th century, the University of Paris, they had regulations for the students in the student dorms, and one of the regulations said students may not have pets, neither dogs nor bears. And I just thought, that is so wild. Of course, I would love a pet bear. But the idea that people would have pet bears, and people would have pet bears, and this would be impossible. And and for us, that we wouldn't even consider this to be a possibility.
There was a place in the Catskills that 20 years ago that had there was a bear in a little chain link enclosure.
Exactly.
It's super depressing. But
I know, and we do find
recent.
this very depressing. Yeah. I know. Well, it's been very recent we have this kind of shift, and now we're kind of horrified, by this idea.
By the things we used to do.
Yeah. I mean, there are bears and there are bears because, as I say, brown bears in particular, they can be very small. They can be grizzlies and red Kodiak bears and really big. So these would be the kind of smaller bears that would be used. Like the bears from the Pyrenees would be kind of small.
Right. You mentioned earlier dreaming of your animal sort of counterpart.
Yeah.
Do you dream?
Oh, I would love to have a dream of bears. Oh, now I'm feeling annoyed. No, I've never had a dream of bears. I need to have a dream of bears. I'm feeling so gypped by that.
I'm guessing you don't do like lucid dreaming or anything like that.
I have had lucid dreaming, but it's never been. It's usually about fleeing the police. I don't know what that means.
Let's hear more about your dreams.
You really want me to tell you
I'm going to kick back in my chair here and write a cigarette.
They're always about fleeing the dream. But I'd love to have a dream about, But I think it's an interesting. I mean, I'm not going to do this in the near future, but I thought of kind of writing a book about medieval dreams because they seem to have had very different dreams than we do.
Example?
Well, like, they dream about these animals. And I mean, when we read about those dreams, we would think, like, no one would ever have those dreams. I mean, we have, like, stupid dreams, compared to their dreams. But their dreams are always prophetic. And the Old Norse really believed this. I mean, if you had a dream, you would kind of tell it to someone, particularly a woman, or someone with some particular seemed to be very good at this, and they would interpret, the dream for you. And then,
right. But if you had a mundane dream, you wouldn't tell anybody. You'd just be like, oh, stupid dreams, not about anything.
Yeah, it's a story in Chaucer. There's a chicken who has, the rooster has a dream that the fox is coming to eat him. No, it's the hen. And then he tells it to someone, and it's like, oh, it's just a dream. And then, of course, the fox comes.
Right. So back to this fear that I'm guessing is unfounded of the cops coming to get you.
Oh, well, I shouldn't have mentioned that.
Oh, yeah. We're going to spend the rest of the time talking about that.
No.
Have you been an outlaw at some point in your life?
No.
Were you an outlaw as a child?
Wait, is this like legally?
You what?
Do not ask me about photocopying text for my students. I refuse to kind of respond to any questions about that topic.
Which topic, being an outlaw?
Photocopying text for my students. I refuse to answer any questions about that whatsoever.
Oh, that's funny, because I've got all the comments from Rate My Professor here.
No.
Professor, universally hated by professors everywhere.
You stop that.
No, it's true. I'm going to read one right now. I can read some of them. I love her. She's terrifying. You might have to shape up quickly, but you'll be grateful. She's a genius. Do not go to the bathroom during class.
Yeah,
all caps.
I'm glad.
What is that about?
I don't know. I mean, it's one of the great mysteries to me. I truly don't understand it. I mean, when I was growing up, I go to the concert. I was just at this concert, the opera, kind of yesterday, and we're all sitting there, for hours, and no one gets up, But somehow, students feel that, like, if you have me there for an hour, I have to, I can't sit still. I need to go to the bathroom. I don't, it mystifies me.
Right. So
you go to the bathroom before class. The same way, when you go to a concert, you go to the bathroom, before the concert starts. So it's just something I really don't get.
I'm guessing you don't have a lot of 75-year-old men in your class.
No, but this is the thing that mystifies me. You go to the Metropolitan Opera, it's all 75-year-old men and 75-year-old women.
Good point.
And they will sit through Wagner, and they will have no problem.
Right.
So it's a biological mystery, I have to say.
Why in the middle class you have to go? And when does school start back up for you?
September 1st or so.
Right around the corner.
Yeah.
And what are you going to be teaching this year? This coming semester?
Fun. I always like coming up with new classes. I'm doing kind of a survey class on medieval literature. Well, it's called Rethinking European Literature 1. And, so that's, just to introduce students to kind of the masterworks of European literature.
And was there a time period for that? It's just
we're starting. We deal with a little bit of Homer, then Virgil's Aeneid, Augustine's Confessions, Dante's Inferno, like the great stuff. So I've taught a version of that for many years.
And up through what year?
I'm going up through the Renaissance. I'm trying to think of, God, where am I ending? Definitely up through Petrarch, which is 14th century, but I think I go beyond that. Last time I did it, I went up to the 16th century with Erasmus.
Right.
But I'm not sure I'm going to do that again this year. But the fun class I'm doing, which is a new class, is called, students at Bard have always been interested in Ireland. And I'm not an expert in Ireland, but they're interested in it. I'm interested in it, and so no one else is teaching this stuff. So, I have a class on medieval Ireland, obviously, and I taught a class on modern Ireland of like all the great stuff, like Yeats and Joyce and Synge and people like that. But I'm doing a class, this fall of the period in between the Middle Ages, and the modern period, and that's a very dark period.
Is there a name for that period?
I'm calling it Hidden Ireland.
Okay.
It's actually between the 16th century and kind of mid, 19th century.
Right.
It's often referred to as the 800 years of oppression.
Okay.
Because this is when the vast majority of the people in Ireland, were, subjected to what are called the penal laws,
Right.
And they had no civil liberties, they could, and so, there were some people who were doing very well, who were kind of Protestant, absentee landlords, they were doing fine. They own
Right.
the land and they have these tenant farmers who are kind of working for them. But I'm trying to kind of, cover this. So it's very tricky because the majority population is, they were not allowed to go to school. They had Protestant schools they could go to where they'd be taught the Protestant, conversion of Christianity, but they weren't going to send their kids to these schools. And so they didn't allow kind of Catholic schools. They had what are called hedge schools, they would have people like literally on by the hedges teaching Greek and Latin, to their kids. But the challenge is this, that, the majority of the population, they weren't educated. They weren't wealthy. They were often, illiterate farmers, And so a long time people just had said, well, there's nothing there to teach. But someone wrote a brilliant book many decades ago now called Hidden Ireland and saying, yeah, there's plenty of stuff to teach, but you just have to either read Irish or, have translations from the Irish. For example, there's the most beautiful poem in the world, practically, as far as written by a kind of woman in 18th century Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
But it was
what's her name?
Eileen Dubhney Connell.
Uh-huh.
It's a fabulous
Can you
poem.
recite some of it for us?
No, it's very long, and it's in Irish, and I'm not going to do that.
Okay.
And I have been kind of studying Irish, but it's really, really hard, so I'm not going to do it. But it's a great story because one of the penal laws, people couldn't own land, blah, 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 blah. But one of the laws said, that a Catholic cannot own a horse worth more than £5. And Eileen Dubhney Connell kind of fell in love with this. And so any man who had ability and talent, who was Catholic, did not stay in Ireland. He left. And he would come to America or Australia. But oftentimes they would travel to the continent and work for an army in France, in Spain, in Austria, where they could be Catholic. And they did really, really well there. And they were very, very successful. But anyway, there's this man, Ard O'Leary, who kind of goes off and he works in Austria for the army. But then he comes back and he and Eileen Dubhney Connell fall in love and get married. But he's brought back his mare, and he has a really good mare. And there's a horse race. The Irish Catholic and Protestants are always obsessed with horses and horse racing. And there's a horse race, and his horse wins the race. And the mayor says, Ard O'Leary, I'll give you £5 for that horse. This horse is worth many, many times that amount of money. He says, I'm not selling my horse. And he's like, you're a Catholic, you can't have a horse more than 5 pounds. And they get into a fight. I don't know. And then that night, he's off trying to resolve the situation. And Eileen Duvney, this is what she recounts in her poem. She sees the horse come back with no one on its back and blood all over it. And the most beautiful part of the poem is she says, 3 leaps. 1 leap, I was on the back of the horse. 1 leap, the horse, and the mare kind of heads off. And the horse takes her where the horse knows to kind of go. And they find her husband's body. And they see an old woman leaning over it. And she gets off the horse. She drinks the blood. Oof. I know. It's just like an old Irish thing. But the question is, who's the old woman? Do you get it? Practically everyone gets it.
No, I didn't get it.
It's her. It's her in the future. It's kind of like this, image of a fetch, seeing herself. But and he was killed. Her family killed the horse, so the mare couldn't have it. Her brother, he didn't kill the mare, but he maimed him so that he was a paraplegic for the rest of his life. And then the brother got to America.
Is there like an animated kids version of the story?
And what's really cool, everything about this is so cool. And the poem is so beautiful. It's a keening, the Irish female tradition of keening. So this is a keen. It was passed on, she composed it. But what's one of the things is really cool about it, her poet's name is Eileen Duvney. It means dark. A is like O for a woman. She had a nephew who was Daniel O'Connell, otherwise known as the Emancipator. He was the man who who went to England, who fought for this, and who brought about the emancipation of Catholics in Ireland.
Right.
And in the United Kingdom, of which it was a part at that point. So, it's a wonderful story. So you see, with a poem like that, you just have to have a whole course, focusing upon something like that.
Right, right. I can see why your students rate you so highly. All the reviews that rate my professor are like, she's the best.
I do not look at that.
She's so much fun. But all the reviews are super positive, and you're so enthusiastic about your work.
Well, I am enthusiastic.
And the story.
I can be a little fanatical at times. And I remember I had one student who says, sometimes she goes into mystical ecstasy, which is...
A mystical ecstasy?
Yes, that's what she said. I kind of knew exactly what she was talking about.
That sounds delighttul. Can you get there at will?
Well, as long as I'm just talking about something like bears or this one poem, I'm kind of with you.
So you looked around at Bard, nobody's doing anything on Ireland.
We used to have all these people who were working on it, and then they all retired or became a dean or something like that.
So you decided to step up and do a couple of classes in Ireland.
Yeah.
Hidden Ireland, Modern Ireland, so on.
Yeah.
When you decide to do that, what do you do next? How do you go about researching and filling out the syllabus and all that?
It's a lot of work, and especially for something like this. So I was on sabbatical in the last semester. I was finishing up these two research projects, but I've also been doing a lot of reading and research, for this class and kind of filling it in. So it's a lot of reading, but I'm a literature professor, so what it really comes down to is I have to kind of find a series of texts that are going to kind of work in a class. And I have to kind of figure out what those texts are going to be. So I'm going to have the students read those, and then we talk about them. I'm not a historian. I'm a literature person. So what we do is we read these materials, and it's going to be a lot of it. Like I say, it's going to be poetry. That's what the Irish kind of wrote because it was orally recited and composed. But we're going to be reading Jonathan Swift, as well. We're going to be reading stuff written by the Anglo-Irish, and we're going to be reading some historical stuff as well.
Right. You say you're not a historian, but when you fill out this syllabus with all the poems and all the books, you are creating a certain certain narrative.
Absolutely.
And part of that is the history.
Yeah.
And, it could be told this way or that way, and you're directing it down this path. What do you do to help your students understand this is just one possible path through this class. There's all these other things that lead to different
Yeah,
places.
no, it's a good question. It's, I mean, I should say also, I mean, I do have some other colleagues, I mean, there's someone in history who teaches, Joyce, and I do have a couple other people who kind of, I'm not the only person teaching anything Irish at Bard. But the thing that kind of strikes me, I mean, again, I'm not a modernist. I mean, I work in the Middle Ages, so, I mean, I'm going outside my territory here. But the thing that kind of strikes me about Irish material, particularly, for modern Ireland, what I'm calling hidden Ireland, is that there's a connection between the literature and the history. And
Right.
you don't have to teach it that way, particularly with modern Irish literature. You can just teach it in terms of modernism. You can teach it in terms of whatever you feel like. I mean, these are
Right.
kind of, 4 Nobel Prize winners of that tiny island with that really small population. I
Right.
mean, they completely, hit above their strength, here. So, and I have a colleague in literature who teaches, kind of Yeats or, I mean, I have other colleagues who do kind of approach this material from other kind of angles. But what interests me really is the relationship between the history and the literature.
Right.
And so, as you ascertained, with this kind of class on hidden Ireland, we're starting in the 16th century, which is when the Tudors come in, and they, and it starts getting really bad. And there were kind of series of different stages, under the Tudors, under the Stuarts, under Cromwell. I mean, every kind of stage is worse than the one before.
Right.
And at every stage, there's a kind of resistance. I mean, I think this is the thing that I want the students to understand. Even though one says 800 years of repression, there were constant revolts, constant kind of acts of rebellion, constant kind of fascinating figures, from the majority population. I should say, Catholic, but also, Presbyterian, because the Presbyterians were also kind of, did not have civil liberties in the same way. So the
Right.
Scots, from the Scots, the Irish often were disenfranchised as well. So it's a complicated history. But as you say, I'm interweaving it, kind of with the history and the literature, and kind of trying to. One basic thing I'm doing right now is working on a timeline for my students. I'm going to give them
Right.
all the first day, and it's going to be kind of just to kind of put this all in some order. And
Right.
I mean, and so it's tricky because I want it to be in depth, but I also don't want to overwhelm them, with all of the, details.
Yeah, you say the literature sort of all is intertwined and tells that history, but certainly in researching this, you find literature that tells one history and literature that tells like sort of an opposed history.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile that when you're doing the through line of your syllabus?
Yeah.
Or am I wrong? Do you not
You're
find that?
right. You're right. I mean, it's kind of complicated, right? I would say in response to that, there was someone, for example, named Geoffrey Keating. That's the anglicized version of his name, and he wrote history in kind of an Irish, and he was telling it from the Irish perspective. And so one thing I want to do is juxtapose just a little bit of his chronicle of the history of Ireland with the way that the English are telling that history. So
Yeah.
there, but that's from an historical account. But when you're dealing with the literature, I mean, what I would say is that the people who were English Protestant, they're writing in English. They write in different genres, and the Irish Catholics who are composing in Irish. The Irish tend to write in, or I shouldn't even say write because it's mostly oral. They compose poetry, lyric poetry or song. I mean, this is kind of what they're famous for. I mean, that harp that to this day is the symbol of Ireland.
Right.
I mean, that goes way, way back. I mean, the story of St. Patrick, kind of arriving in Ireland and saying, your music will be cherished forever. I mean, this is something they were always famous for. Even before, the British arrived. And so I was just in Connemara, kind of a couple of weeks ago, and you go to the local pub and there's some incredible music, there, like world-class music at the pub, in the corner.
Yeah.
So that's always been the tradition. So as I said, but because it's lyric poetry, it often is not narrative. I mean, there's a whole kind of genre of their poetry, with Ashling poetry, where they imagine Ireland in the form of a woman, a beautiful kind of woman. So it's almost fantasy kind of literature. It's not representation of reality.
Right. And do you read much fantasy literature apart from the stuff?
Oh, that's a tricky question because a lot, I mean, fantasy literature as we know it was invented by medievalists, right? I mean, J.R.R. Tolkien was a medieval literature professor.
Well, you've got this book, The Danger of Romance,
Exactly.
Truth, Fantasy, and Arthurian Fictions.
Exactly. So a lot of, and especially nowadays with young people, this is the genre they're most attracted to.
Right.
I have a complicated relationship to it. I mean, I really loved Harry Potter. I had a whole chapter in my Danger of Romance class about Harry Potter. I was very fond of that. So there are types of fantasy that I really like, but it's not. But give me medieval literature any day of the week. So I'm writing a book right now, which there's a bear book that I'm finishing, but I'm also writing a book called Why to Read Medieval Literature.
Why what?
Why to read medieval literature.
Okay, good.
This is just I'm just going out
there. Keep yourself
there.
in a job.
Exactly. Well, don't joke about it. Given the Romans and the humanities worldwide, it's pretty bleak.
Yeah.
But I think one needs to make that argument. So this book is about that. It's going to be a short book, and I'm really kind of making this pitch. There. But I'm working on the introduction, and one of the questions I'm saying is that well, if you're a lot of people are so attracted to fantasy right now, whether it's fantasy literature or fantasy in the movies or TV. But so why should you not just watch Tolkien? Why should you actually read the sources that Tolkien studied and translated and was inspired by? You know. So
what's the short answer to the question that you put in that book? Why should we read medieval literature?
I'm actually
interested enough. 2 minutes left.
I know. Yeah. I'm actually meeting with the President Bard, who's quite wonderful in this to kind of, because I think he's going to help me handle it. But basically, the short answer to it is that medieval literature makes you happy.
Right.
Medieval literature, I mean, even if it ends with everyone dying, you're still really happy. It's affirmative. Medieval people were actually really positive about human beings. They believed that people say the age of faith. Well, no, it's not that. It was actually the age of reason. They believed that human beings, with their minds, with their reason, and with their imagination, could understand truth.
Right.
I mean, if you look at the proof of the existence of God, that's evidence of it. But also, if you look at the literature, that's evident of it as well. I mean, Dante thought he could understand what happens, to us in the afterlife through the exercise of his imagination.
Right.
But I was at a dinner party last night, and the kind of question I posed everyone, because I'm just baffled by this, was I realized that all of the texts that I'm writing about in this short book, they include some version of a kind of paradise. It's not necessarily a Christian paradise. It usually isn't a Christian paradise. But they include like some image of some beautiful, happy place where like life is wonderful. And the question I was asking them, why in modern literature do we have endless accounts of dystopias and we never have an account of a utopia? Why is it we can so easily imagine, zombies coming down Canal Street in Lower Manhattan and eating people alive? No problem. That seems like realistic to us. But like a place where people are happy? That's completely unrealistic. Like, why?
I wouldn't say, the environmentalists anywhere painting a picture of this as paradise right here on Earth. This is our heaven. This is our wonderful.
Yeah, but we're destroying it. Isn't that their violence? We've already destroyed it.
But a part of their call to arms is this is our heaven. And sure, we're destroying it, but also this is the place.
Yeah, but medieval people thought that as well. I mean, I have this one account of an Irish saint who ends up in this island. And it is paradise, but there was no sense of like, I don't know. There's a weird way in which environmentalists are more Christian than my medieval Christian authors. They're more about saying you're bad, human beings are evil, people are kind of doing terrible things, they're destroying everything. Whereas medieval people, are so much more positive about human beings. They're like, yeah, original sin, yeah, we fell, but we're good. We're made by God. We're made in the image of God. We can do good things as well. Jesus Christ was a man. It's a really upbeat, kind of version of literature.
So there it is. Now we don't need to read the book, Why to Read Medieval Literature. You gave it up. Thank you very much,
Thank you
Professor
very much,
Dr. Sullivan, for being here. and talking. We're out of time. We can't even believe it went so fast.
Oh, well, I
But
had so much fun. Thank you so much.
What a blast. I can talk to you forever. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. Have a great Friday night and a fabulous weekend. Thanks to the Epicurean, for Matt and Jen, the fabulous producers and creators of Radio Free Rhinecliff. Take care. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.